Hi, everybody. I'm Linda Abraham, President and founder of Accepted. I've been a medical school admissions consultant for 25 years, and I am presenting today's webinar. A few items worth noting before we start. Number one, we're going to have a contest towards the end of the webinar based solely on content presented during the webinar. So stay tuned and you can win. Number two, if you have not yet downloaded your webinar worksheet, take a second to do so. My suggestion is that you print it out. You can find it in the handout section of your control panel. There'll be a link there. Again, you can obviously do so on the computer if you want, but my suggestion is that you actually print it out and take notes. Now, there will be probably times during the webinar when I could ask you to raise your hands, and I'd like to test your hand raising ability. First of all, by raising your hands, I mean that you click on the orange hand icon, two icons underneath the horizontal orange arrow on your control panel. Actually, the hand icon isn't orange. It's that horizontal orange arrow. So how do I want to test it? Please raise your hand if you are attending this webinar because you want to become a physician, your dream career. Please raise your hand if you're here because you want to become a physician and that's your dream career. Okay, well, most of you have figured out how to raise your hands and go to webinar and are here for the right reasons. So good, congratulations. We're going to use the question window for your questions and have scheduled time for Q&A at the end. As a matter of fact, a couple of Accepted consultants are going to be joining me for the Q&A. So please feel free to post your questions at any time during the webinar in the question window. We're also going to use the question window for your answers to my open-ended questions. So if I ask an open-ended question, please post it in the question, your response in the question window. I'm told that some people attending a webinar really are interested in the special that we sometimes provide at the end of the webinar. They're even anxious, and that anxiety takes away from their focus. I don't want that to happen to you, so here's the special for the webinar today. Well, that's me. I should probably tell you a little bit about me too, but I'll come back to that in a minute. The special is $250 off our primary application package and $500 off our primary plus secondary application package. The coupon code is saved now, and the offer expires December 19th. So you have a few days, you have actually a week to contact us if you want to speak to a consultant first, and you can also speak to the two consultants who are going to be joining us later. Or if you want, just buy it online and make sure you get those very significant savings. Now, a word about me. I mentioned that my name is Linda Abraham. I'm the founder and CEO of Accepted, which was founded in 1994. So we've been in business for 25 years. Maybe almost 26 years at this point. I'm the co-founder and first president of the Association of International Graduate Admissions Consultants. I've been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, U.S. News, and other media. I'm also the host of the Admissions Straight Talk podcast, which you'll probably hear a little bit more about later. Now, I frequently get calls from applicants, and in this case, I'm going to talk about Joe. Joe is every applicant, if you will, who wants to go to medical school. And like many of the people who call me, Joe wants to go to medical school, and he wants an allopathic medical school, and he wants to attend in the United States, preferably in his home state. He wanted my opinion as to his chances and how we could help him get accepted. I asked him about his GPA, his major, his MCAT score, clinical exposure, community service. Joe had a 3.2 GPA, 2.9 in the sciences, BCPM. He attended a decent state school. He had a 492 MCAT the first time he took it, and his clinical exposure consisted of a summer of volunteering in a local ER, plus shadowing the family physician for a week. He was a bio major as an undergrad. His community service outside of the shadowing and the volunteering in the local ER consisted of a couple of volunteer gigs at the Habitat for Humanity. And as I said, he wanted U.S. allopathic schools. I explained to him what I think he needed to do to become competitive, as well as how we can guide him through this process and assist him in presenting himself at his best. I'm sure you agree that Joe has a lot of work to do. He has to present better evidence that he can succeed in demanding science classes. He has to improve his MCAT. He probably needs to do some more volunteering to show his commitment to medicine, that he's realistic about it. But we're going to go through many of the things that Joe has to do in the course of this webinar, because there's a lot that Joe can do to prepare himself to apply and then transform himself into a competitive applicant so that he can pursue his dreams. Like hundreds, if not thousands of applicants before him, and sometimes their parents, he was basically asking me, how can I get accepted to medical school? And that's exactly what we're going to discuss today in this 5-part framework. I'm also going to issue several warnings and caveats along the way. The first one is that if you're going to try and wave a magic wand, it just will not get you into medical school. A dab of makeup won't do it, and spin isn't going to be sufficient either. What you need to do is submit a substantive application, and substance in my mind means competitive qualifications and an effective presentation of those qualifications. Your overriding aim is to show that you belong at the medical school you are applying to, just like a puzzle piece fits into a puzzle. If you do that successfully, they will want you and accept you. My goal for this webinar is to show you that a successful medical application has to have each of the 5 elements I'm going to present, not 1 or 2 or 3 or even 4, but all 5. So let's start going through them. The first one is you need to show that you can do the work in medical school. Now let me ask you in the question window, and I'd like you to respond to this one. How do you intend to show that you can do the work? In the question window, how do you intend to show that you can do the work? What are your thoughts on this topic? Will your volunteer work assure them that you can do the work? Have a competitive GPA and MCAT. That's right, Bianca. That's the most common way, is through your undergraduate transcript and MCAT score, and that's presented in the primary application. Ideally, you want to be at or above average for accepted students at the schools you're applying to for both grades and test scores. If not, how can you convince schools to accept you with, let's start with, below average grades? Realize that averages are what they are because some are accepted with below average stats, approximately half, not exactly, but approximately. At the same time, the farther away you are below average, and if both your grades and your MCAT scores are below average, the less likely it is that you can effectively demonstrate to the schools you can do the work. So what if you have below average grades or a low test score? Well, one of the things you should consider is a post-bac program. You can retake the MCAT if the test score is low, but that can be a mixed bag because some school will average MCAT score, some will only take the latest one. Your MCAT score can actually go down. We had that happen to a client a couple of years ago, like big time, and it was really, really hard. If your science grades are below average, consider a post-bac program that will allow you to bring them up. Perhaps one that also provides study skill enhancement and or MCAT prep if you need that. Now, a high MCAT score can mitigate, at least somewhat, a slightly below average GPA. For US allopathic schools, you want to ideally be at 510 plus. Realize that below 510 doesn't guarantee rejection, and above 510 doesn't guarantee acceptance. This is a rule of thumb, and obviously it also depends on the schools you're applying to. But that's a nice goal to have in mind. Again, your ability to do the work is generally evident in your transcript and test scores, the objective elements of the application. And for a quick look at data on acceptance rates and average MCATs and GPAs, check out acceptance. Whoops, where do we go here? I missed it. All right, you can check out acceptance selectivity index, which you'll find at accept.com/medsi. Now, Joe couldn't make this case. He couldn't show he can do the work. Both GPA and MCAT were below average for medical school, and his science grades were also below average, actually lower than his overall average. So that's number one. Show that you can do the work. And again, the most common way that you do that is through your transcript, undergraduate transcript, and test scores. Post-bac program can definitely help if you're weak in this area. Graduate school is a little bit less effective than the post-bac program, so they can also help. Step 2, show that, here we go, show that you have a realistic idea of what clinical practice is, what you know what you're getting into, and perhaps have some direction within medicine. Now, again, for you in the question window, how are you going to show that you have this realistic idea of medicine? What have you done that you could point to? Shadow, good, Victor. Community service and clinical volunteer service, good, James. Good. Okay, great. Lab, volunteer, good. Lab is less clinically oriented, so probably not quite as good. But you're right. And getting back to Joe, he struggled to do that on our call. He did have some clinical exposure, but compared to most of our successful clients, it was on the weak side. Medical schools want to admit people who are committed to medicine. And if that commitment is based on the latest television hospital show or popular movie, it's not real. It must be based on experience in clinical settings. That way they'll know you're not going to be so squeamish that you can't function at the sight of blood, that you're realistic about the hours, that you understand that not all patients are nice and not all outcomes are good. Can you handle the workload, the emotional strain, and the sheer hard work that is a career as a physician? Do you have direction, both in terms of your educational needs and your post-med school plans? The road to becoming a physician is windy. It has lots of curves and dips and some potholes along the way. Many secondaries will ask you why you want to attend their school. Have you thought about the kind of education you want to have? Are you more interested in primary care or specialties? Do your areas of interest match the school's focus and strengths? For example, are you more interested in urban or rural medicine? Do you have evidence of that interest? Are the schools that you're applying to good at what you're interested in? Are you interested in primary care versus specialties? Is research important to you, or do you really want to focus on your clinical skills? Are you interested in a specific specialty? Your realism will come out in your essays, your secondaries, your letter of recommendations, and the interviews. I like to say, and this is a kind of a 30,000-foot view, that the primary is about and I've talked to medical school admissions people who agree with me. The primary is about your fitness for becoming a physician. The secondary and the interview are about your fitness to attend a particular school, your fit with that program. And this gets to the third element in the 5-part framework. You want to show that you share the school's values and its mission. Now we're talking about fit. How and when, and this is for the question window again, how and when do you intend to show fit with specific schools when you're filling out secondary applications? What's the argument that you're going to make? Okay, that your method or style of learning fits their curriculum. Good, Victor. Anybody else? All right, let me tell you what I think about it. Well, actually, before I go on, I have a question for you. I'd like to know a little bit about where you're at in the application process. I'm assuming that most of you are planning to apply in the 2020-2021 application, and some of you are preparing for 2022 or later, and I'd like to know what the percentage breakdown is. Again, the options are applying to apply 2021, or 2022 or later. And with 80% having voted, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I'm going to close the poll, share the results. So 71% of you are planning to apply in the upcoming application cycle, and 29% are planning ahead. Okay, great. You're both welcome, more than welcome here. Second question I have is, when you apply this summer, are you going to be a first-time applicant or a reapplicant? Are you going to be a first-time applicant or a reapplicant when you apply, whether it's this year or next year, whenever? Okay, we're at 81% having voted. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to close the poll, and here are the results. 69% of you are first-time applicants, and 31% are reapplicants. Okay, I actually expected the reapplicant percentage to be a little higher, but that's fine. It's good to know. Getting back to my question about secondary applications and the focus is on fit, for those of you who are reapplicants, you've already gone through this once. Did you, in the question window, did you look at the school's mission and values when you were applying and doing your secondaries? Anybody want to say yes? Good, good. All right, that was a good move. You should be looking at their mission and values because many schools say that they're not putting that up there for their health. That is what drives the schools. And in attempting to show fit, you have to show they identify with the school's mission. If the secondary essays and the interviews, you need to be prepared to talk about your experiences and draw from them the qualities that your target school values. So, what does this mean? If service to the urban underserved is a priority for the school, let's say they're in the heart of Chicago, talk about your experience at an urban soup kitchen and how effective you were as a member of the food services team. If your target has programs in rural medicine, and that's also your interest, talk about your upbringing in rural Nebraska or South Dakota or Idaho or Georgia or wherever it was, and your desire to settle there, if true. Now, there's a big difference when you're talking about showing fit with mission and values. There's a big difference between, wait, let me hide this, between mouthing platitudes, spitting back values or mission statements, and actually showing that you share the values. The spit back and the platitudes, frankly, that's just sleight of hand. It isn't convincing, it isn't real, and you know what? It probably isn't authentic. But examples in your essays, your primary and secondaries, your activity descriptions, whether the most meaningful or the regular activity descriptions, the secondary essays, bullet points in your CV if you give out one, items in your activity history, the comments made by your recommenders, and your responses to interview questions must all demonstrate these qualities. And again, in terms of fit with particular schools, it probably will come in through the primary, but it has to come through the secondary. One quality that is increasingly valued by many, if not all, medical schools is teamwork and the ability to work collaboratively. Now, in the question window, can you please give me some examples of teamwork that you've been involved in, and I'll comment on them. I want you to see that you don't have to spit back websites or talk in vague generalities. College sports, very good, where you again, you could go into your role more. Were you the team captain? Were you second in command? Were you the ball collector? Were you whatever? That would be, but it would be an excellent example of teamwork and collaboration. Working in a research lab, okay, again, you'd go into your role and what you actually accomplished there. Co-founder of a community organization, excellent, Lydia. Again, what did you do? What was your impact? What was the impact of the organization? Working together with an undergrad research team to get a paper published regarding cancer treatments. Excellent, James. What has that research led to? I don't know what they would lead to, furthering a certain drug treatment, or whatever the impact was, bring it out, highlight it, highlight how you collaborated if you have the room for it. Work on the mental health executive team as the admin officer. Okay, again, that's good. Probably there's more detail there. Lead scholars organization. How big is the organization? You don't have to tell me, but you would want to highlight that. What was the budget of the organization? How many people were you working with on your team? Any of you could say that, by the way. How many people were on the team? What was your role? All right, this is good. Let's go on. If you have professional direction or think you know which area of medicine you want to go into, check out residency placement data to select the schools that are strong in your area of interest. You can still change your mind. You're not locking yourself into any particular residency. But if your focus turns out to be your most desired residency, you may find yourself ahead of the game when you are heading into the match. And again, that goal, that interest, I shouldn't even say goal at this point, would be one more way to show fit. Now, what is a bad way to try and show fit is to focus on stats, rankings, and forum rumors, because they can obscure this aspect of admissions. Medical schools have among the lowest acceptance rates of any professional program. They have lots of applicants and they can be choosy. So this fit aspect is really important. Going back to Joe, he didn't have any direction in medicine at all. He didn't know any of the school's stated or unstated values. And you need to know those in order to both choose the most appropriate schools for you and convince them to accept you. And after all, you want to be happy. You're going to be there for 4 years. All right, so that's the third element in the 5-part framework. Let's go to the fourth. You want to demonstrate that you'll be able to contribute to class discussions and teamwork, the school's community, and ultimately make the school proud. Now, what does this part of the framework imply to you as an applicant? What does it mean that you have to show? In the question window, please. Anybody have an idea? This is a harder one, the last ones I asked, than the other ones that I asked. If you want to demonstrate that you'll be able to contribute to class discussions and teamwork, the school's community, and ultimately make the school proud, what do you need to show them? You need to show a habit of contribution through your school projects. Okay, you're warm, Lydia. You're warm. You need to show a habit of contribution through your essays, resume, activity history, interview, and recommendations. So, have you contributed in the past? That's what they're going to be looking for. Have you made a difference to your sports team, to your community organization, to the place where you volunteered clinically? And realize that especially for this ability to have an impact or to make a difference, it's probably more about the non-clinical community service than about the clinical community service. And also realize that the definition of community can be very broad. Can be very broad. It really can be any group that you're part of. Your sports team could be your community. Your church could be your community. Your geographic neighborhood could be your community. Any group that you are part of and that you serve can be part of community service, can be defined as community service. Now, the difference between community service and, frankly, being a nice person is assuming responsibility. If you take upon yourself a role or responsibility for any organizations on the screen or any other organization, that is where service comes in. And it's a differentiator, and it makes it more valuable from an admissions perspective than just being a nice person. Now, non-traditional applicants may have extensive work experience to draw on, and they can use that to show the qualities that schools value. So, for example, were you perhaps an engineer and therefore a problem solver? Could you use your problem-solving skills from engineering for diagnosis and creating treatment plans? Perhaps you're a teacher. Well, clearly you've honed your ability to explain complex topics to people who previously didn't understand them. You've presumably have good communication skills, and you're used to educating others, and that will help you when you're trying to educate your patients. Or maybe you're a team leader, engagement manager, or project manager. Well, again, leadership, teamwork, and organizational skills are all qualities that medical schools value and doctors need. Realize that most medical schools have too many qualified applicants, and many of the people rejected can actually do the work. If not formally, then informally, med schools admissions is a two-step process. The first one is evaluation, determining the qualified, and medical schools always have too many qualified applicants. Then comes selection, or crafting a diverse class of committed, talented future physicians. and that injects a subjective element to the admissions or selection process. The implication from the selection process is, yes, they want someone who can do the work, shares their values, knows something about clinical medicine. However, given the competition, that's simply not enough. They have no reason to admit someone without something distinctive to contribute or someone lacking initiative. What they want to see is a record of past impact and contribution. They want to admit the light bulbs, not the ones that are grayed out. Now, then the last part of the framework is to reveal the personality traits that med schools value. This is similar to, very close and could overlap with the values part of the framework, but it's not the same, and I did want to highlight it, so I separated it out. In the question window, please, what personality traits are med schools looking for? Perseverance, grit, empathy, very good. Compassion, excellent. Commitment, responsibility, very good. Leaders, compassionate, excellent. All right, you folks are doing great. These traits should come through in the stories you tell in your personal statements, the most meaningful experiences, the activity descriptions, the secondaries, the interview. In other words, throughout your application. Determination is another good one. Taylor, as is high integrity. Very good. Leadership is highly valued, and I mentioned teamwork already. And they really are, to a certain extent, the flip side of the same coin. There are going to be times in medicine where you're going to be on the team, and there are going to be times when you're going to be the leader of the team, and you have to be able to do both. Compassion and caring, absolutely required. Humility is also a valued quality, though it's talked about less. It doesn't mean that you demean yourself, but it is definitely the opposite of arrogance and absolutely required for effective teamwork. Attention to detail is reflected in the care you take on your essays and your applications. I recently had on the podcast, Admissions Straight Talk, the Assistant Dean of Admissions at SUNY Upstate. Actually, not the last time she was on, but the previous time. And she absolutely railed against the typos and lack of punctuation that they sometimes see on what was then a very simple secondary application. So please, applicants, remember your applications aren't Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, or Snapchat, or whatever the latest and greatest social media is. You're applying to professional school. Show you're a professional. A future professional. Speaking of social media, clean it up. There was a Kaplan survey a couple of years ago, and 29% of medical school admission staff did check applicants' social media accounts, and the majority found something that negatively affected an applicant's admissions chances. So, do clean up your social media accounts. And in selecting the examples in your essays and interviews, choose those examples, experiences, and anecdotes that answer the question and reveal these traits, most of which are also reflected in medical school values in one way or another. And don't make the reader think too hard. Sydney Foote, who's going to join us in a few minutes, articulately laid out in her Nail Your Medical School Interview webinar how to do this. And she said, explicitly weave into your anecdotes the traits you want the schools to recognize. Don't rely on them to figure it out or to come to the conclusion you want them to reach. Tell them. One more way to show professionalism, commitment, discipline, integrity, and organization, not so much integrity, but to show all the other things I mentioned, is apply early and respond to all secondaries quickly. Almost every medical school admissions person I have ever spoken with says apply as early as possible, provided you don't compromise the quality of your application. I think Ryan Gray of med school headquarters likes to talk about medical school admissions as a musical chairs, and I think the metaphor is very apt. As the cycle goes on, there are fewer and fewer seats available, and it's harder and harder to snag one. With secondaries, you ideally want to return them within 2 weeks of receipt. So do research on your secondaries so that you know why you want to attend the specific schools you are applying to, and keep notes on that research so that you don't have to do it all over again. Use the time between the submission of your primary and the arrival of your secondaries to pre-write the most common essay questions. And then you can adapt them as the schools send out their secondaries. Or if you know that certain of the schools that you're applying to automatically send secondaries, and you can look up last year's secondaries, which they tend not to change. Write them ahead of time. You can always revise them, adapt them for other schools if you can't use it for the school you intend to. Now, let's go back to your goal in submitting an application. Show that you belong in medical school. And here comes the contest that I mentioned at the beginning. You can win a free 15-minute consultation with an accepted consultant. And the first 3 people to answer the next question get a free consultation with an accepted consultant. Okay, first 3 people to answer correctly the next question get a consultation with an accepted consultant. What is the first part of the framework that will make medical schools want to accept you? In the question window, please. Okay, see, Victor, you got it. James got it. And Ondine, I'm apologize if I mispronounce your name. Ondine got it, okay? The first thing that will make schools, convince schools that the first part of the framework is an academic track record showing that you can do the work, right? Part 2, have clinical experience and direction within medicine, that realistic perspective. Show that you share, number 3, that you share the school's values and its mission. 4, demonstrate that you'll be able to contribute distinctively to the school's community and program, and reveal the value traits that schools want to see in future physicians. And these were the steps I was recommending to Joe when I spoke to him on the phone. These are the things that we advise our clients to do when we work with them also. But we are able to focus a little bit more on individually on what each person needs. Now, the admissions committee readers are sharp, intelligent professionals. Don't try to craft, fake, or fool. The best presentation of you is an authentic reflection of your achievements and dreams, keeping in mind the 5 elements of a successful medical school application. Now, before we go on, and we're going to get to the Q&A in just a few minutes, what is the most valuable piece of advice, information, or insight that you got from the webinar so far? Show, not tell. Okay, good, Victor. How to complete the secondary essays. Okay. Difference between the primary and secondary. Okay. Well, that was all right. I'll have to remember to include that in the next time I give this. Anybody else? What was the most valuable piece of advice, information, or insight that you got in today's webinar? How important fitting with the school's values? Good. I'm glad that came through. Great. Research school's mission and values? Good. Demonstrate how you can contribute to the school. Apply early? Good. All great answers. When to submit secondary applications? All right. Good. Wonderful. Now, I've spoken with hundreds, if not thousands, of medical school applicants like Joe and like you, striving to get into medical school and stressed at the work involved and the possibility that they may not make the cut. We here at Accepted know how difficult and stressful the process can be, and we're here to help you. Your goal now is to apply confidently and successfully to the right medical schools for you. To do so, you need the know-how supplied by experts applying their expertise to you and your application as an individual. In other words, you need Accepted medical school admissions consulting. Given the complexity of the application process and the stakes, you need a guide who knows the process inside and out and who can support you through this grueling journey. You need Accepted to be your guide. When you engage Accepted, you can access professional expert advice, experience, and objectivity. You can save time, you can apply with confidence, you can apply successfully. We have the admissions experts, the guides, who can mentor you through the process so that you achieve your goal of applying confidently and successfully. Former admissions directors, staff members, post-bac program directors who have been on the other side evaluating applicants and who can be your guide through the process, or who have years of experience advising applicants how to get in successfully. Here's what you should do after the webinar is over. Visit www.accepted.com/primary. Choose the service that's right for you. Get the guidance you need to apply the high-level advice I've given you here to your specific situation. Go from confusion to clarity and from doubts to confidence. Now, some of you may say, isn't Accepted expensive? Well, so is rejection. Our fees are clear, but the cost of rejection is not quite as obvious, even though it can be significantly higher. So let's take a look at the risks of not applying with Accepted. There's the cost of reapplication, which can easily be several $1,000s because the secondary application fees really add up pretty quickly, and you might have to retake the MCAT. A year of additional earnings at a much lower level than after you earn your MD or DO program. That can easily be 5 figures. And there's even the potential that you could have gotten into a better program, however you define that, and however you want to price that. You're at a crossroads now. You can take the do-it-yourself approach, or you can invest in your professional future. Every year, we work with applicants who talked to us a year earlier and decided after taking the do-it-yourself approach and getting rejected that they were going to work with us a second time around. They would have been far better working with us initially, and so would you. But enough from me. What do acceptance clients say? I've been loving my help so far. My consultant, Dr. Herman Gordon, has been very helpful and knowledgeable. Or the second one, I wanted to share my exciting news. I will be attending the University of Washington School of Medicine. I received an email from the Dean of Admissions saying that I am awarded a hefty scholarship. I'm feeling blessed and excited right now. I believe that was actually Sid's client. And the third one for Alicia. I want to thank you, Alicia, for your support through my application. This was such a challenging process for me, but your patience and editing knowledge allowed me to express my passion for medicine. So we'd love to help you as we help these clients, the ones who wrote the comments you just saw, and thousands of other clients over the last 20 years. Or here's a couple more testimonials. I really appreciate all of Cheryl's help and input on my application. I feel much more confident in my personal statement after working with her. Or for Sid, hello, Sydney. Wow, I'm so impressed. You are a genius. I can't believe how well you managed to cut my essay in half without compromising my tone or eliminating little stories. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I could not have done it without you. There are 17 more hours left till the application is due, and I'm not stressed at all because I know I have you by my side with this essay. So we'd love to help you as we help these applicants, the ones who wrote the comments you just saw, and thousands of others over the last 25 years. So once again, the steps you need to take are on your screen. I also want to mention that I mentioned at the beginning that we have some fantastic savings for you on the primary application package and the primary plus secondary application package. Both offer a comprehensive approach, no clock ticking, one to the primary only, one to the primary plus a good chunk of secondaries. And with that, I want to go into the Q&A. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Herman Gordon, also known as Flash Gordon, who is the former director of admissions at the University of Arizona Medical School in Tucson, as well as a professor at that program and currently an accepted medical school admissions consultant. I'd also like to introduce Sydney Foote, who after a stint in administration at the University of Washington Medical School, joined Accepted as an admissions consultant. She has been helping our clients gain acceptance to MD and D programs since 2001. So so Flash is Sid, you want to unmute yourself? There we go. Welcome, Dr. Gordon and Sydney Foote.
Hello.
Okay.
Hey, Linda.
Hi. All right, so let's go to the questions. Now, what I'd also like to do, we've been experimenting with this and it's worked rather nicely, is I've been asking people if you don't want to be muted, if you don't want to be unmuted, then just mute yourself manually and I'll know that that means you don't want to be muted. If you don't mind actually speaking your questions, then I will unmute you. Okay, so Taylor Smith has a question. Will pharmacy tech experience help? Will that be considered clinical exposure? Sid, you want to take this one first?
It depends on how much contact you would have with physicians. I have worked with pharmaceutical applicants or people who have been in that field and then come to medicine. It's not necessarily a real smooth transition sometimes. And I would definitely encourage you to get experience in a physician's environment where you do have actual contact with doctors and patients as well.
Okay, great. Dr. Gordon.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you want to have patient-facing contact in applying to medical school. So that might be possible as a pharm tech, but that's your ultimate goal in whatever job you choose.
Okay. And then Taylor, you also asked, is it negative you do not have a social presence? No, it's not negative at all. I'll just answer that one. Okay, we have a really interesting question here from Victor. Let me see. I'm going to let you speak your question, Victor. Go ahead. Victor, you there? Question is about the difference between shadowing and clinical. I have shadowed EMT. Does that count as clinical exposure? Dr. Gordon, you want to take that first?
Well, let's see. So there's a difference between shadowing and actually being in the trenches.
Right.
So shadowing has the advantage that you can dabble here and there, and so you get a broad exposure to the possibilities in medicine. But you also want to have that patient-facing contact, if at all possible. That's what schools are looking for today.
Okay. Sid, do you have anything to add to that?
I totally agree with Flash, but I would say shadowing an EMT is not necessarily ideal. You definitely want to get shadowing with some physicians.
Right. Or get an EMT yourself. Become an EMT.
Sure.
And if you become an EMT, you should practice. So a lot of people just take the course and think that, oh, that's enough. It's not nearly as meaningful as actually being out there as an EMT.
Right, right. Okay, we also have a very interesting question from James. Let me see if I can unmute him. The advantage of unmuting is A, I think it's a little bit more interesting, and B, you can ask follow-up questions. Okay, James, is your mic working? There are a lot of dead mics today. Okay, I'll read it then. I am currently volunteering in a patient outreach program at my local hospital. The program is made up of past patients dealing with pectus and scoliosis. Would this be considered community or clinical volunteer service? Flash, you want to start with that one?
Sounds like clinical to me.
Okay.
Community service would be more like tutoring underprivileged kids or working in a soup kitchen. This definitely has a clinical aspect to it.
Okay. Would it be possible, I'm going to throw this out to both of you, if let's say somebody has a ton of clinical exposure and less community service exposure, to say, to classify this as community service, or does it even matter?
I wouldn't see the advantage of classifying it as community service.
Okay. All right, fine. Here we have another question. And this is from Lydia. Let me see. Lydia, you want to ask your question?
Yes, I had two questions.
Sure.
So one of them was, I have more than 5,000 hours of scribing in the emergency department. And so I was wondering if that counts for clinical experience and if I will need additional clinical experience other than continuing shadowing physicians here and there.
Well, I could take that. 5,000 hours is very impressive. So I think you would have sufficient clinical hours. The one thing that you might want to do in shadowing, though, is to get a broader view of medicine. So it's not just in the emergency room, so that you could find out what it's like for someone in private practice, for instance, or find out what a dermatologist does. So it just gives you a more rounded idea of medicine before you go to medical school.
Okay, but then, so with that many hours, then it's not necessarily that I need additional clinical hours, correct?
Correct.
I would think you'd have plenty of hours.
Okay. And then my other question was about my GPA. So I have a 3.68 overall, and I graduated from college in 2016. My science GPA, I believe, is 3.58, if I'm not wrong. So would you recommend me to take maybe additional undergrad classes before applying, or that's a relatively good GPA?
Uh,
Go
I
ahead.
would. I think that. Well, how did you do in the MCAT?
Well, I didn't do well. I took the MCAT last year. I had a 498. I actually applied and did not get accepted. So
Okay.
I'm getting ready to reapply next year, and I'm studying right now for the MCAT. I plan to take it in January.
So boosting the MCAT is definitely a priority. And what state are you in?
Virginia,
Virginia? Okay.
yes.
So I wouldn't think it would be necessary to raise your GPA. There are colleges in the area that you would be very competitive for if you could get your MCAT up considerably. So I think that should be your priority rather than trying to raise your GPA. The other thing is that raising your GPA takes an awfully long time unless you're going to a post-bac program. So taking just a couple of classes is not going to make a very serious dent.
Okay. And so with the GPA, then will a 510 and above be the competitive, or if I get a 505 there, it should still be okay, depending on the school, I know, but on average.
So definitely want to aim for 510.
Mhm.
When I'm looking for competitiveness in the schools, I don't necessarily look at the average, and Flash, you may do this completely different, but I like to look at the lowest accepted GPA and MCAT scores that they have, and that it wouldn't mean that you're competitive necessarily, but you would, I would say, have a foot in the door. And then the thing that you really need to do at that point is to make your story stand out and really show, like Linda was just talking about, showing your fit, showing that your commitment, showing all of the things that you need to make them want you, despite not being right at the average. I mean, obviously, you are competitive if you're closer to or above their average scores, but I wouldn't rule you out if you were a little bit below that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anne has a really good question. Go ahead, Anne. You there? All right, then I'll ask it. What can you do if you have not received any interviews by this time? Flash, you want to take that one?
Well, it's not like you can call them up and say, hey, give me an interview.
No.
So some interviews aren't granted even until January or possibly February. At this point, they figure you've made your best application, and they don't want to, they don't want you sort of sending in lots of extra emails. If there's going to be any change, there has to be something significantly different about your application. So maybe you got a publication from your lab research, or you've got some new great job that you've been at for for at least 6 weeks. Something that you can say is different, and so maybe you could take another look at my application. But if you're just saying, hey, why haven't you looked at me yet? It's not going to get you anywhere.
Okay, great. Cindy, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just add that I've had several clients have success with in the area emails. Just if they're going to be in a location, far enough away that they would need to travel to, and they've applied to a school in that area, sending a notification that they're going to be around it doesn't always work, and they have had just as many, probably more, that they would say, no, we can't accommodate you. But I know at least for 2 people it has worked, and one of them actually led to two in the last year that it actually worked, and one of them led to an acceptance at the school, when they were just very polite and just saying, I just want to let you know that I will be in the area, and if possible, I would love to, meet and talk to you and, have an interview at your school. It's not guaranteed by any means, so don't take it personally if they say no, but, it's worth a try.
The other thing, I wanted to add two things. One, do know the school's policy regarding letters of intent or updates or whatever, because there's a broad range. Some really don't want any, and some are very open to it and actually take such letters as demonstrations of interest, which will help you. So do know the school's policy. That's number one. Number two, we're now December, and interview invitations will again go out in January and probably into February and then trail off. At some point, if you still haven't heard from the school, or you haven't gotten the invitations, or you start getting rejections, you need to kind of pursue parallel paths. I say at this point, or by the beginning of the year, you need to send in letters of intent if appropriate. You need to attend interviews if appropriate. And you also need to think about what you're going to do if you don't get accepted. So, that would mean reapplication this year. It might mean taking some classes. It might mean retaking the MCAT. What are you going to change about your application? What perhaps went wrong? I know it's not fun. This is not a very popular piece of advice I'm giving right now. But if you, by the first of the year, don't have several interviews and haven't or starting to get more and more rejections, then I think, again, you have to pursue parallel paths. I'm not saying give up on this year, but do pursue parallel paths. Okay? I don't know, Sid and Flash, what do you think about that?
It's good advice from the start to have that plan B. If it doesn't happen by a certain date, I'm going to apply for post-bac programs or, whatever it might be, whatever your plan B might be.
Right. Okay, now there's a really interesting question here from James. I was wondering how much weight is placed on the personal statement when compared to statistics such as MCAT score or GPA during the application process. Flash, you want to take that one as former admissions director?
So, yeah, I can address that one. The personal statement plays it's the most significant role at the very end when your whole package is complete. You've got your interview reports, and it goes to the admissions committee. At that point, everyone I've talked to says the personal statement is 50% of the application. That's where your readers go to meet you as a person, and it's where they kind of make a strategy for how they're going to review the rest of your application, how they're going to put all the pieces together. But to get to that point, you need the other stuff. You need the metrics. You need the review of your secondary application. So the early reviewers have to say, yes, this person's a good fit for the school. So all of that. So even though you've written the personal statement probably first in the whole process, right, it's going to play its most significant role much more towards the end. And then all of that other stuff, the metrics and the secondary, are going to get you to the point where your personal statement then becomes all important.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sydney, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's a great insight. Just it makes it even more important that your secondary and your primary essays don't contradict. Make sure that your story is consistent.
That they're consistent, they complement each other, and they're good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, here's a good question from Winnie. When is the latest time to take the MCAT if I want to apply next year? Sid, do you have a suggestion for that one?
So there's different opinions on this. I would encourage you to take it as early as possible, especially if it's the first time you've taken it, because a lot of times people don't do well the first time, or you'll score below what your practice tests were indicating before you went in. So if you take it early, you would have time to take it again. In terms of actual latest date, I wouldn't take it after, I would take it before May so that your scores are ready to go out with that first batch of applications. So when your primary is set and they have everything that they need, in terms of your transcripts and the rest of your application, they'll have your MCAT score right there as well when they start to look at it in June.
Okay, sounds good. Flash, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree that, and also your application won't go out
Right.
until you have at least one MCAT score submit or available for AMCAS.
If you take you won't know your score for, what is it, like 6 weeks after you take the exam? Or is it a little bit less than that now? It might be 3 weeks now. But if you take the exam in let's say March, and you get the score in April, and let's say you need to retake it, well, that would probably put you in June, and then your application would be verified till July, which isn't horrible, but it's not as good as getting it done earlier and being able to submit in June and having it verified in early July as opposed to late July. So the earlier you can do it, the better off you are. Okay. And then Tanisha has an interesting question, and she has her audio turned off, so I'm going to read it. I have worked in the Veterans Hospital for many years. I work with psychiatrists on a daily basis. Let's move. Hold on a second. Should I look for additional volunteering opportunities, or is my Veterans Hospital experience good enough? Flash, want to take that one?
So I'd say the issue is whether she's worked directly with patients. So if it's all behind the scenes or more on sort of the shadowing side, that's not as impressive as having that actual face-to-face contact with patients.
Right. Okay. Sid, do you have anything to add?
Nope, that's totally right. You
Okay.
need to have that patient contact.
All right. And last question from Taylor. So when you do your secondary application, do they bring out something different? Are they supposed to bring out something different than you put in your first personal statement? Or is it supposed to start some of your personal statement? It's supposed to be some continuity, I think is what he's trying to say, between the personal and the secondary. Sydney, why don't you start with that one?
Yes, there's continuity in the sense that if you've presented yourself in a certain way in your primary, then you want it to continue, but you don't need to, you do not want to repeat the same kind of stories. You want to give them a different side of you. So let's say that you're presenting yourself as a committed, community engaged person, a leader in your community in your primary statement. In your secondaries, you want to keep that going, but it may be in this point you want to show your leadership and teamwork in a little different light, maybe showing your clinical work or showing more of how you worked with groups at school, or whatever it might be. You want to show those things need to complement each other.
Exactly.
And not contradict, but they don't need to be this exact same stories. But you don't want them to look at your secondary and your primary and say, this seems like two different people here.
And you don't want them to say, this person is telling me the same thing in the secondary that they told me in the primary.
Yeah.
You don't want that either.
The other thing with the secondary is, and I can't stress this enough, make sure you're answering the question that the primary is asking, because so many people will
The secondary is asking.
I'm sorry, and the secondary prompt is asking, because so many people will just, I don't know if they're trying to recycle answers from other schools, or they're trying to just give an idea of what they want to talk about. But with the secondaries, it's really the school is trying to find out specific things that they're interested in, and you need to answer those questions directly.
Okay, great. I want to thank, first of all, Sid and Flash for joining us this evening.
I find one of the most important things I do with clients on secondary is they're much more difficult to interpret sometimes.
In terms of what, the questions?
The prompt, it's like, what are they really asking for here? And I'll find quite often that clients will take it one way, but knowing the process, I'll see what they're really asking for. And I'll try to help the client understand that and refocus their response to the prompt on the secondary.
Okay, I'm going to have one more question. It's from Jim, and he asked, "How does going to a big school versus a small school where affect things?" He's believes that if you get a lower GPA in a large school and normally a higher GPA in a smaller school, how important is that if the MCAT score is the same from an admissions? How is it viewed by an admissions person? Flash, you want to start?
So it really depends on the particular person on the admissions committee. So people have different biases about it. Some people really like applicants who are coming from a small liberal arts college because they'll figure that they've had a lot of attention from the faculty, that they've really had a lot of interaction with the other students in an academic setting. And then other reviewers may not have any particular feeling one way or another. So it really depends a lot on who picks up your application and how they feel about it.
Right. I also think that the assumption that a small school is automatically easier than a large school is not necessarily true. You might have, big schools that have a lot of grade inflation. You might have small schools that are very demanding. So the question might have more validity if a school is known for little grade inflation or a lot of grade inflation. I mean, West Point, for example, is a fairly small school. It has almost no grade inflation and a very hard grading scale. I'm not going to start. Penn State is an enormous school. I'm not sure it's known for a hard grading standard. I've never heard that. So I'm not sure the big small school assumption there really holds. But in any case, again, I want to thank Flash and Sid for joining me and helping me out with the Q&A. I want to thank all the applicants for their attendance today. And I have a final story and thought before we part. Here, first the story. Sally, who hired accepted to work with her, is an Asian American who had good stats and a strong but fairly typical profile. Her consultant coached her through the process, including coaching to overcome shyness in interviews. And here is what Sally wrote after her acceptance. Oops, I don't even have it. I'm sorry. I don't have what she wrote, but I'll read it to you. I don't think I would be at the same place today without your help. So out of 20 secondaries, I received 18 interviews. I went to 11. I was accepted to 5 and waitlisted at 4. While obviously Sally's results were great and the most obvious benefit of working with Accepted, there was another one, less tangible but no less important. Sally was more confident throughout the process. She was less anxious, even during her interviews. She considers herself an introvert and admitted to being, quote, very nervous, close quote, about the interviews before she worked with Accepted consultant Sydney Foote. So that's just one example of how we have helped our clients. And as a final thought, all 5 parts of the framework that I discussed today are necessary for successful application. It's not 1, 2, 3, or 4 that will do it. You need all 5. Sally had all 5. The successful clients that you heard from when you saw the testimonials had all 5, and you can too. Get accepted.